r/AskReddit by Redmond ETS. Healthcare workers of Reddit. What is the most fucked up thing you've seen in your career? Had a guy come into my ER one evening. MVA, pedestrian versus auto. He was hit at roughly 45 miles per hour and went up and over the car that hit him. From the waist down, it'd be tough to call his remaining bone structure anything more than gelatin. He had multiple broken ribs and a flail chest, one of his arms was bent where there weren't joints twice, and he had a dent in his skull that was deep enough you could stick a finger to the second knuckle into, and wide enough to fit an adult male fist in. He was alive on scene for the medics, and finally arrested when they pulled into the ambulance bay. Mercifully our attending had us do a single round of CPR before calling it. I've seen some pretty bad cases working the ER, but that man was brutalized in a way that I'll always remember. Worst part was he had no ID on him, so we had to wait for family to call because their dad went out for a jog and never came home. When he got back they were supposed to go out to dinner because his youngest son just got a full ride at his #1 college choice for academics. The most emotionally fricked thing I saw while working at a hospital was this regular we used to have in pediatrics. Teenage girl with diabetic ketoacidosis who had a rough upbringing. At the time she was in a group home while her older sister was figuring out custody. At a certain point in her admissions she would be medically cleared for discharge. However, she figured out that as long as she required treatment she wouldn't have to leave. She ultimately would starve herself, missing all meals of the day, except for a light snack at night. Denying her body what it needed, just so she can stay in the hospital longer. Staff would beg her to eat something, but she would continue to refuse. Poor kid sacrificed her health just so she could avoid the hell of group home living. A woman who laid on her couch soiling herself for weeks, and when the family called EMS they had to remove her from the couch with her body embedded in it. Pieces of the couch were embedded in her bed sores. Her skin was completely gone over her lower back, buttocks and back of her legs. There were maggots in her wounds. We had to take photos for Adult Protective Services. It was the most horrific things I've ever seen. And the odor was unbearable. We had her heavily medicated but she was still responding. I told my boss she needs to go to ICU and be completely sedated as this is inhumane for her to be feeling this pain. Emergency guardianship was done. Eventually she was entered into hospice and put on a morphine drip. She returned to our unit and passed away. I can still see it in my mind. We were literally crying while we treated her. I have so much trauma from my 30-year career. We had a similar case with a recliner. And a baby left in a swing for weeks. Humans can really suck. When the 20-somethings and 30-somethings, who have destroyed themselves with alcohol, are in the ICU and the team is trying to explain to the wife or family that if, a big if, they make it out of the ICU, the next months are going to look a lot different and in any case are quite possibly their last months, and the replies are, yeah, he really has talked about cutting back on the alcohol. Very tough to hear a reply like that. Like, I'm so sorry, you do not understand the conversation we're having right now. Registered nurse here. When I was in CVICU, I had a guy who was in his early 40s and a bodybuilder. He ended up getting a heart transplant due to steroid abuse. When most get out of heart surgery and have a lot of inflammation at the surgical site, they leave the midline chest incision open and put some see-through dressing, think saran wrap, so we can monitor the swelling to go down before the CV surgeon can close them up, which is usually 12 to 18 hours later. This man was intubated on a vent and had a 4-point restrained, wrists and ankles, to the bed frame. Everything is going well, and while I had my back turned in the pod checking on my second patient, we all hear this loud creak, like metal bending. We all rush to the sound and I turn around, and the bodybuilder looked like a freaking zombie, eyes rolled back in his head, had sat up in the bed and was so strong he was bending the bed frame from the restraints. And what made the scene remind me of Resident Evil was that we can see his new heart somewhat partially beating out of his chest against the saran wrap dressing. And he was about to pull out the intubation. We threw everything we could at him and he would not go down. Versed, fentanyl, Nimbix, Propofol, and a few others I forgot. I've never been so stressed and was wired for the rest of my shift. I still think about that particular situation a lot. I got plenty of other stories from my career, but that sticks out the most. Got a few. The absolute awfulness of humans and how they treat each other, children getting beaten by parents and sexual assault. Maggots. Just so many freaking maggots in wounds. How calm some people can be. Had patients cut off fingers and toes and walk in like, hey, when you got a minute can you reattach these? The reality of how close the healthcare system is to utter collapse. I was a dental assistant and had a 4-year-old little girl come in as an emergency. Her face was swollen and she was crying. We had to pull 5 of her baby teeth because they were abscessed and 3 of her teeth were broken or decayed. The dentist lost it on the mom and told her we were calling DHS. Mom tried telling us it was genetic as she handed her daughter a Mountain Dew to drink while the dentist wrote the prescription. We did call DHS, but I have no clue if anything happened. I'm in a burn ICU. A few times a year big burns come in from industrial accidents. I'm talking 90% plus burn. Charred to muscle and bone. Bedside escherotomy to restore perfusion. Explaining to consulted neurologists I can't get a pupillary response because the eyes are melted. Daily painful dressing changes on that. Running dialysis on them and roasting in the room because we keep them 90+ degrees. What is the reason for the high temp? Is it helpful in recovery? Yeah, with no skin there's pretty much no temperature regulation, so they rely on external environment temperature. We will heat the room, get lamps on them and a machine called a bear hugger. Use an esophageal warmer if they are intubated. The ridiculous, contradicting, and plain evil reasons I've seen insurance companies deny coverage. A patient came into the ER for a black foot. He was living in his truck semi-voluntarily. His sister said he lived with her if he was clean, but he preferred drug use. At some point he got an infection on his left foot. When I asked if he knew he had a problem with the foot, he said, I had a pair of sneakers but I had to throw them out because they were leaking. Oh, water leaking in? No, fluids leaking out. He traded the shoes for snow boots. Finally came to the ER when he couldn't take the boot off. His calf has swollen too much. When they cut the boot off, his foot was black, toes completely dry with bones visible. It was that week. He also had a stage 4 pressure injury, down to the bone, on his hip. He was completely mobile before this, walked just fine. But he'd sit in his truck, snort heroin, and pass out for hours, soiling himself. While inpatient he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. Oh. Another time we had a nurse OD in the bathroom. When my dad did his ER rotation, he saw a 10-year-old girl for severe abdominal pain. Turned out to be a ruptured ectopic pregnancy as well as an early pelvic infection from untreated gonorrhea. Somebody needs to be and that life-saving drugs and treatments are often priced out of what people can afford. During my social service year of medicine school I was assigned to a rural clinic, and one day this 42-year-old guy entered the clinic asking for contraceptive pills for his 12-year-old girlfriend. She was kicked out of her house because her mother accused her of seducing the stepfather because the guy tried to violate her twice. The police did nothing to any of those guys. Bloody hell, man. This is criminal. What the fudge? We called the police but they did nothing. Rural Latin America is no man's land. A mother screaming in the ED when her 6-year-old daughter coded. Absolutely blood-curdling screaming. I'll never forget that. Nothing I've seen working in forensic psychiatry, including seeing someone rend off their own genitals, is nearly as horrifying as hearing a faceless insurance company say it won't pay for your cancer treatment drugs. An old woman I used to take care of had a feeding tube, multiple repositioning pillows, whole body atrophied, so her existence was just pain and living purely out of spite. She couldn't talk, move, nothing to communicate. Just a vegetable. Her son would come visit for 5 seconds, talk on his phone and leave without speaking to us about her. I later learned she was kept alive because their beliefs. The longer your parents live, the more blessed you'll be. She finally passed about 2 years ago or so, and I don't think I had ever felt that much disdain for another human being. Making her live like that for his own benefit, piece of crap. Elderly people kept alive when the body is rotting, agonizing pain, completely contracted. They have zero quality of life and the family who never visits insists they stay a full code. A man elbow deep in a meat processor. Crazy thing is, it got reconstructed, not 100% mobility but it worked. Back in the late 90s, a group of college frat boys were doing the usual hazing stuff. They decide to put the two recruits on top of a jeep and drive 60+ miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone. Took a corner too fast and flipped it. Both were meat crayons with one of the guy's faces peeled off like a mask, only attached on one side of his head. They did not survive, and trying to do CPR and keep them alive before the ambulance got there. The accident ironically happened less than a mile from the hospital. 17-year-old put a shotgun in their mouth. Women drove in a storm and had a tree limb piercing through her. COVID. Families blinded by their emotions to see by their family members suffering with limbs and tissue necrotic. Large tubes inserted over and over. The fear of, am I going to die? The sadness of no one around you when you die. Too many to recount. Rather, I'd prefer to stop. I work in pediatrics now. I am happy. A 3-month-old who had been raped so much that his intestines were prolapsed out his little bum. Sorry, you asked. Man, I have stories for this one. I saw a 13-day-old who was murdered by its father who, based on physical evidence, had already been scratching the child, drawing blood with fingernails, putting out cigarettes on its flesh, and the finale for the child who wouldn't stop crying was for dad to smash it through a sheetrock wall in their home. I saw an 8-year-old attempted beheading survivor identify her mom's boyfriend as her attacker as he stood visiting her at the foot of her hospital bed. She was blowing the whistle on him for abusing her younger sibling, and he answered the investigator social worker's call and pretended to be the girl's grandfather. He had then isolated her after she got off the school bus and sliced her throat just about deeply enough to kill her with a box cutter. I saw a kid who was forced to exercise to death for stealing candy. Saw another kid who nearly died because she drank some of the chemical solutions used in making meth because it was in a Sprite bottle and she was thirsty. Saw more than one child completely destroyed by the family pit bull, and heard parents blame the toddlers because he or she knew you can't look him in the eye. That's all, folks. Thank you for watching. If you like videos like this one, why not like and subscribe for more? Have a nice evening.